Darian Solis stood in a holding cell that smelled faintly of sterilized metal and something like hot copper. His wrists itched from the restraints they'd removed only minutes ago. The room hummed with a low-frequency vibration that never quite settled into the background. He'd been on this alien station for 3 days, and already he was wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. A panel opened on the far wall with a hiss, and a creature stepped inside. It was tall, bipedal, and resembled a skeletal feline covered in sleek, moss-green skin. Its eyes were large and horizontally slit, and it carried a black collar in one hand. "Darian Solis," the creature said, its voice like gravel dragged through syrup. "You are the human selected for the predator taming exam." "Yeah," Darian said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Lucky me," the creature stepped closer. "I am Kale. I will be your observer. You will not speak to the subject unless instructed." Darian raised an eyebrow. "What exactly is the subject?" Kale turned and pressed a button on the wall. A second door hissed open and something enormous stepped through. It was a quadruped, easily 4 times Darian's weight, with a narrow snout and thick, bristled fur. Its eyes locked onto Darian the moment it entered. "Is that thing muzzled?" Darian asked, taking a step back. "No," Kale replied. "The shock collar will suffice." The creature lunged forward, snarling, but an invisible force yanked it back mid-leap. The collar already around its neck glowed with a sharp blue light. Darian flinched. "You sure that thing's not going to kill me? If it does, you fail." "Oh, great," Darian muttered. "No pressure." Kale handed him a device. "This will allow you to trigger the shock remotely. You must train the predator to obey commands using the collar. You have 7 days. Darian stared at the device, then at the creature pacing in the enclosure now formed between them by a transparent barrier. "What happens if I succeed? You live," Kale said simply. The door closed behind Kale, leaving Darian alone with the pacing beast. The first hour was a standoff. The creature Kale had called it a Vaskari snarled every time Darian moved. He watched it closely, keeping his thumb well away from the shock trigger. Its fur was patchy in places, and one of its hind legs was slightly swollen. "You're injured," Darian said aloud, more to himself than to the Vaskari. "Probably explains the limp." The Vaskari growled low. Darian sat down cross-legged on the cold floor. "I'm not gonna shock you unless I have to. That's not how I do things." The Vaskari stopped pacing. Its nostrils flared. "You smell me, huh? Yeah, I probably reek. Haven't exactly had a shower since I got here." The Vaskari lowered its head slightly but didn't approach. "I'm not like the others," Darian said. "I don't use pain to get what I want. I've trained dogs, horses, even a damn hawk once. Never needed to fry their brains to get them to listen." The creature watched him in silence. "Name," Darian said, tapping the floor. "You need one. Can't just call you it or the Vaskari. How about—" "Rell." The Vaskari blinked slowly. "Rell it is," Darian said. By the second day, Kale returned. "Your progress is inadequate," Kale said, observing from behind the barrier. "You have not used the shock function once." "Because I don't need to," Darian replied. "Look." He held out a chunk of dried meat he'd been given for feeding. Rell growled but did not lunge this time. Instead, she sniffed the air, then padded forward cautiously. Her massive head loomed inches from Darian's hand. Kale tilted his head. "You determine the sex, not hard," Darian said. "Also, she responds better to a calm tone." "I think she's been abused. Maybe that's your training method, but it's not mine." Rell took the meat, retreating to a corner to eat it. She didn't snarl this time. Kale's eyes narrowed. "You have 72 hours to demonstrate command compliance." "Let me do this my way," Darian said. "You will fail," Kale replied, then turned and left. Day 3 was rough. Rell refused to eat. She lay curled in one corner, her breathing shallow. Darian approached cautiously, hands open. "Look, I know you're hurting," he said. "But if you don't eat, you won't have the strength to stand." Rell didn't move. He crouched low, slowly reaching out. When his fingers brushed the fur behind her ears, she flinched, but didn't bite. He scratched gently, and a low vibration passed through her chest. Not a growl, something like a purr. There we go, he whispered. Just a scratch behind the ears, huh? Kale entered silently behind the glass. She is showing signs of submission, Kale noted. No, Darian said. She's showing trust, Kale frowned. Trust is irrelevant in predator control. Then maybe you're doing it wrong. Day 4, Rell stood when Darian entered. She still limped, but she approached him directly, nose nudging his chest. I brought water and meat. Still warm this time. She took the food gently from his hand, chewing with slow deliberation. Darian sat beside her, back resting against the wall. Kale entered again, this time with 2 new observers, both shorter, with luminous eyes and smooth gray skin. He has not activated the collar once, Kale said. One of the observers stared at Darian. Is this typical of humans? No idea, Darian said, but it's typical of me. The second observer stepped forward. Prove control, issue a command, Darian sighed. Rell, sit. Rell stared at him. Sit, he repeated, tapping the floor. Rell hesitated, then slowly lowered her body into a seated position. The observers conferred quietly. She is obeying, one said. Kale didn't look pleased. That night the lights dimmed early in the enclosure. Darian was about to lie down when he heard a low growl. He turned. Rell stood stiffly, eyes fixed on a vent in the corner. A moment later something dropped through it, metallic, spider-like, and armed with a syringe. Rell, back, Darian shouted. The Vaskari didn't move. The drone sprang forward, needle extended. Darian grabbed a feeding tray and swung hard, knocking the drone into the wall. It sparked and buzzed, then exploded in blue light. Rell lunged forward and covered Darian with her body. When the door burst open seconds later, Kale and 2 guards stormed in. What happened? Kale demanded. Darian pointed at the scorched remains. That thing came through the vent and tried to inject her. Kale studied the wreckage. Unauthorized, sabotage perhaps. Rell snarled low. Kale's gaze lingered on the human and the Vaskari. You protected the subject. She protected me too. Kale seemed troubled. Day 5, Darian woke to find Rell curled beside him. Her breathing was steady. He scratched behind her ears and she leaned into it. You're healing, he said. Still limping, but better. Kale entered, alone this time. You have demonstrated a unique method, he said. There is discussion among the council. About what? About whether your approach constitutes true control. Darian stood, brushing off his pants. Control, no, partnership. Yes, Kale studied Rell, who now lay with her eyes closed, relaxed. She would kill for you, Kale said. She doesn't have to, Darian replied. That's the point. Kale remained silent a moment longer, then he turned to leave. Day 6 was a test. Kale returned with a second Vaskari, this one clearly less injured and far more aggressive. It was thrown into the same enclosure and Darian immediately stepped between the 2. Hey, what the hell are you doing? They must coexist, Kale said. Or both will be terminated. The second Vaskari lunged at Rell. Darian acted instinctively, shoving Rell aside and taking the brunt of the hit. The creature's claws raked across his shoulder, tearing flesh. He fell hard, pain exploding through his body. Rell roared and tackled the attacker, slamming it into the wall. Kale triggered both collars. Electricity surged, both creatures collapsed. Darian lay on his side, bleeding, gasping for air. He heard boots. Then Kale knelt beside him. You are injured. No kidding, Darian grunted. Get me help. A stretcher was brought in. As he faded out, he saw Rell crawling toward him, her eyes wide and uncertain. He reached out weakly. Stay. Then everything went black. Darian woke to the sound of suction and metal clicking against plastic. The light above him was too bright, and his left arm felt like it had been replaced with wet cement. You're conscious, a voice said, high-pitched, almost like someone speaking through a recorder that had been jammed into a helium balloon. He blinked against the light, and the face that came into focus had 3 eyes and no nose. Its skin was a dusty mauve, and it wore a coat that looked like it had been grown instead of sewn. You're not Kale, Darian said, voice dry and hoarse. I'm not anything like Kale, the alien replied. And thank the void for that. You humans attract too much kinetic trauma. I'm Tavrik, surgical liaison for the 6th sector of behavioral trials. You've been unconscious for a full shift cycle. How bad? You've got 12 stitches in your shoulder and a temporary carbon brace under your clavicle. No organ damage. You're lucky the Vaskari hit soft tissue. Your species bruises like overripe fruit, by the way. Darian tried to sit up, but a soft restraint kept him pinned. Muscle relaxants, Tavrik said. Don't fight them. You'll just end up looking like a writhing sack of wet rope. A dull ache pulsed under Darian's ribs. He shifted slightly and felt something tug at his back. Drain tube, Tavrik said quickly. Don't remove it or your lung will partially recollapse. Again. Again? Yes, we reinflated it after the 3rd hour. Very dramatic. You screamed something about bologna sandwiches and then passed out again. Darian let his head fall back onto the pillow. Where's Rell? In quarantine, Tavrik said, but she tried to chew through the observation glass twice. The guards are not. Enthused, she okay? Some minor retinal scorching from the collar surge. Nothing permanent. She's pacing more than usual. I believe she associates your absence with injury, which, in fairness, is accurate. Darian closed his eyes against the throb in his head. Did Kale order the second Vaskari? Tavrik hesitated before answering. No, it came from the committee directly. Apparently they wanted to introduce a control variable, see how well your subject would defend or dominate. I almost got gutted. Yes, Tavrik said cheerfully. And you didn't even use the shock collar. Fascinating. Later that cycle, Kale entered the med bay without knocking. You are ambulatory. I'm not a toaster, Kale. I'm healing. Kale approached the bedside and placed a small device on the table. It resembled a flattened pyramid with a single red dot at its apex. That's not a gift, is it? It's your reassignment token, Kale said. You've been moved to the final phase of the exam. The committee approved your methods under Observational Clause 17. Which is unprecedented. Darian squinted at the device, and if I refuse, you are free to reject the reassignment, Kale said. You will be returned to your origin system under evaluation failure, which is your polite way of saying I get dumped on Earth with a permanent black mark and no clearance. Kale tilted his head but didn't deny it. What's the final phase? You and the subject will be placed in an open environment simulation. No barriers, no collars. You must demonstrate sustained behavioral influence under stress conditions. Darian looked at his bandaged chest. I'm not exactly in peak condition. The simulation begins at your discretion, but the committee will not wait indefinitely. Tavrik re-entered the room with a syringe in one hand. You're not authorized for discharge yet, he said, jabbing it into Darian's thigh before he could protest. Stimulant, pain dampener, Tavrik replied. You'll still feel awful, just slightly less awful. Which, in my professional opinion, is your default human setting. The open environment chamber sat on the far end of the behavioral wing, an enormous dome with a synthetic forest, artificial streams, and programmable weather. It was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made Darian's skin crawl. He stood at the edge of the enclosure, one hand resting against the outer wall. Rell waited just inside the tree line, her posture tense but not hostile. The collar was gone. You held up better than I did, he muttered, stepping forward. Rell sniffed once and trotted to his side. Her eyes scanned his bandages, then she nudged his hip gently. Yeah, I missed you too, a speaker crackled overhead. Simulation begins. A gust of wind swept through the trees, followed by the sound of distant hisses, several of them layered, irregular. Rell's ears twitched. Darian crouched beside her. You smell that? The air had changed acrid, like scorched rubber and metal filings. 3 shapes emerged from the underbrush. They were low to the ground, each with 6 legs and a head shaped like a pickaxe. Their bodies shimmered faintly as if they were only half there. Rell growled. Darian didn't move. The creatures circled them slowly, clicking mandibles and dragging their claws through the dirt. One darted forward. Rell intercepted it mid-leap, slamming it into a tree with enough force to crack bark. The others hesitated. Darian scanned the perimeter. They're testing reaction thresholds, seeing how you handle multiple threats. Rell returned to his side, blood on her muzzle. The two remaining creatures backed away, then vanished into the underbrush. The forest went still again. A new sound replaced it, low, rhythmic pulses that vibrated through the ground in slow waves. "Something heavier," Darian said. "Great." The trees at the far end parted as a bipedal machine stepped into view. It stood 3 times taller than Rell, with limbs like scaffolding and a single glowing eye at its center, its arms retracted into mounted weapons. "No collar this time," Darian muttered. "So let's try something new." He stepped forward, raising both hands. The machine paused. "Rell, stay." She didn't move but rumbled slightly, her body coiled. The machine's eye narrowed and it fired. Darian dove, hitting the ground hard as a concussive blast tore through the spot where he'd stood. Rell howled and charged. "No," he shouted. "Flank it." To his surprise, she broke left, disappearing into the trees. The machine pivoted, tracking her movement. Darian ran right. Another blast missed him by inches, scorching a trench into the dirt. He spotted a fallen branch thick as his leg and grabbed it. The machine turned again, too late. Rell exploded from the underbrush at full speed, leaping onto its back and clawing at the exposed panels near its shoulder joint. Darian charged in and jammed the branch into the machine's leg joint. It staggered. Rell tore something loose with her teeth, and the weapon arm sparked violently before collapsing. The machine fell with a groan of metal and hissed steam. A voice echoed throughout the dome. Simulation concluded. Rell padded back to Darian, blood and oil dripping from her muzzle. She nudged him upright. He leaned against her. "Okay, we're officially a nightmare team." Kale met them at the exit with an unreadable expression. "You did not issue a single command." "I didn't need to," Darian said, wiping his face. Kale studied Rell. "She anticipated your strategy. She understood the pattern. She knew what I needed before I said it." "The committee will need a full cycle to review the footage," Kale said. "Your methods are disruptive, effective," Darian corrected. Kale didn't argue. Tavrik arrived shortly after, carrying a small med scanner, and immediately started scanning Darian's side. "You've reopened the sutures," he said, not looking up. "You're leaking plasma." Again, Darian gritted his teeth as the scanner beeped. "You should be in bed." "I've never been good at that," I noticed. Tavrik applied a temporary sealant and handed him a nutrient pouch. "This tastes like boiled tree bark," Darian said after sipping. "It is boiled tree bark." "With protein." Rell lowered herself beside him, eyes half-lidded. Tavrik crouched beside her and held out a scanner. She didn't move. "You're either very brave," Darian said, "or very stupid." I wanted to see if she'd let me scan her optic nerve. "Fascinating structure." Kale turned away, already speaking into a communicator. Darian looked at Rell, then at the dome behind them. "How many more phases?" Tavrik stood. "There are no more phases." "If the committee approves this, you'll be the first behavioral specialist to pass without using coercion." Darian leaned back against Rell's warm flank. He didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes and let the silence settle. By the 3rd morning after the simulation, Darian's sutures had finally begun to hold. He could breathe without tasting copper, and his shoulder moved without that sickening tug in his chest. The medical chamber's lights dimmed in gradual pulses to mimic sunrise, though the hue was always just a little too lavender to feel natural. Rell lay curled on the floor beside him, her flanks rising and falling with slow, even breaths. A patch of her fur had been shaved to treat a burn across her ribs, now covered in a film that shimmered like beetle shell. She twitched once in her sleep, lips curling, then settled again. Tavrik stood on the opposite side of the room, flipping through a tablet that projected its data vertically in a blue column. He tapped the air once, and the projection shifted to a series of neurological scans. "Her prefrontal response matrix is adapting faster than predicted," Tavrik said, not looking up. "Spinal reflexes have decoupled from aggression triggers. That's not supposed to happen, not this quickly." "Maybe she's just smarter than your scans," Darian said, stretching his legs out with a slow grunt. Or maybe she just needed someone to stop electrocuting her every time she blinked. Tavrik pursed his lips, which was unsettling given that he barely had lips to begin with. "No sarcasm before second nutrient cycle," he said, flicking the projection away. "Your metabolic readings are still skewed. I can smell your cortisol from here." "You people always this cheerful in the morning." "I'm not a people," Tavrik replied, "and if I were, I'd still find you irritating." The door slid open with a low chime. Kale entered, wearing a dark uniform threaded with thin, glowing lines that pulsed faintly with each step. A long strip of fabric trailed from one shoulder, marked with symbols Darian couldn't read. "You've been summoned," Kale said without preamble. "Summoned." "I'm still half-stitched together." "They've accelerated the evaluation. Final review is in 90 minutes. You'll present your results directly," Darian blinked. "To who exactly?" Kale turned. "The Behavioral Enforcement Council, all 7 sectors, full chamber." Tavrik let out a long, low hiss. "That's not protocol, even I know that." "Protocol has been suspended," Kale said. "Too many anomalies. They want to assess the subject in person, and the human—" Rell stood as if on cue. She stretched, front legs forward, claws extending, then padded toward Darian. He scratched gently behind her left ear. The spot wasn't raw anymore, just warm and slightly puckered. "She goes with me," Darian said. Kale gave a single nod. "That is expected." An hour later, Darian stood in a circular chamber beneath a dome of glass that showed nothing but swirling blue mist. The floor was white, seamless, and scuffed only in places where claws had scraped it. 7 platforms ringed the space, each occupied by a council member. They were taller than Kale, robed in layered fabrics that shifted colors slowly, like oil on water. Rell sat quietly at Darian's right, tail curled around her paws. Her head turned once, tracking a soft movement above, but otherwise she appeared calm. A voice rang out from the central platform, not amplified, just naturally resonant. "You refused coercive conditioning." "Correct," Darian said. "You applied a method with no prior precedent in Vaskari behavioral trials." "Also correct. You suffered physical harm to prevent a reaction cycle." "I didn't suffer to prove a point," Darian replied. "I did it because she was more than a test subject. She's a person." A ripple passed through the chamber, a shift of posture, a tightening of robes, a flicker of bioluminescent spines along one of the council members' necks. "You claim sapient agency for a species previously classified as hyper-reactive sub-predatory." "I'm not claiming anything," Darian said. "I'm reporting what I saw. She made decisions. She protected. She adapted. She withheld violence when she had every reason not to." Another voice, sharper and faster, spoke from the platform on the left. "What prevented her from turning on you once the collar was removed? Trust," Darian said. "You've spent decades assuming obedience comes from dominance, but fear isn't loyalty, it's just delayed rebellion." Kale stood behind him, silent. The central figure leaned forward. "We have reviewed the footage. We've seen her disarm a threat without direction. We've seen her submit to medical treatment voluntarily. We've seen her refrain from lethal force even when injured. These things are unprecedented." Rell shifted slightly, tail curling tighter. "And yet," the central figure continued, "you continue to refer to her as a partner, not a subject." "Because she earned it." The council was quiet. Then, from the rightmost platform, a new voice spoke, older, slower, with a rasp behind each word. "What would you recommend, human?" "Full behavioral reclassification," Darian said. "Scrap the collar protocols. Introduce relational training. Give them choices. You'll get better outcomes and fewer corpses. And if they refuse our new methods, then maybe they've learned from us more than you expected." Another long pause. Rell stood and approached the center of the chamber. The council members tensed, some leaning back, one lifting a hand, but she stopped exactly at the circle's edge and sat, eyes forward, unmoving. The older voice returned. "Has she been taught this display?" Darian shook his head. "No, that's all her." The chamber remained silent for a full minute. Then, without ceremony, the central figure tapped a panel on their armrest. A chime rang out. "It is decided." The Vaskari species shall be reclassified as conditionally cooperative. Coercive methods are to be suspended. Pending further review, your recommendation is accepted. Kale's eyes widened slightly. Tavrik, watching from the observation ring above, gave a slow nod. "And what of the human?" asked the older voice. The central figure turned to Darian. "You are offered a post, behavioral integration lead. You will train others in your methods. Should you accept, you will remain on station. If you decline, you will be returned to your origin world with unrestricted clearance and full honors." A low rumble came from Rell's throat, not a growl, but something softer. Darian crouched beside her, placing a hand on her side. "I'm not leaving her. Not now." The council did not object. Later that day, after formalities had concluded, Darian sat on a bench outside the Arboretum dome, sipping something that tasted faintly of lemon and algae. Rell lay beside him, watching a group of smaller creatures dart across the grass. Her ear twitched once. Tavrik approached with a data pad tucked under one arm. "You're going to break the entire system," he said. "Good," Darian replied. "It needed breaking." Kale arrived a moment later, holding a small container. "These are for her," he said, handing it over. Darian opened it. Inside were long strips of dried meat, marbled with something that shimmered faintly green. Special formula? High protein, low toxin. She'll need it while recovering. Darian offered one to Rell. She sniffed it, then took it gently between her teeth. Kale remained for a moment, then turned to leave. "You did more than pass the exam, Solis," he said. "You changed it." As the sun simulation dipped below the artificial horizon, casting long shadows across the dome floor, Darian leaned back and let out a slow breath. "Come on, Rell. Let's go teach them how it's really done." She stood and followed.